I think that's best.
Okay. So how do we use burn down to create and to help make our team self-driving? And why burn down report is important. So as you start to create a sprint, you select a set of requirements and commit them into a development sprint. Therefore, you create stories, and then you create tasks. So on day 0, you have accumulated about 225 hours of total workload that represents a development team's total hours of effort. So as you can see, as you start to work on each of the tasks, the time remaining represent the initial estimate by all the developers on their task workload. So if you think about just one person, that person, he or she, might own, say, 10 tasks. And each task, let's take about the task number 1. Initially, that person estimates, oh, it's going to take me 3 days to finish the task. It's important to recognize time remaining represent an abstract or an estimated effort. I am predicting myself. If I work 3 days committed, I'm going to finish this task. But on the second day, don't you wish this person will be estimating, you know, I have been spending 1 day, I have 2 more days, then I can finish the task. At the end of the second day, you would hope the time remaining become 1 day. Obviously, on the second day, the time remaining can become, instead of 1 more day, it becomes 2 more days, because you know what, this task just, it takes more effort than I estimated. It's also possible, you know, on some days, the time remaining becomes less than estimated. That's why you see the time remaining fluctuate, going up and going down. Hopefully your time remaining will always follow this ideal line, go to 0. What do you think, what will make this time remaining going up? Well, estimating time goes up. Is it possible you will be creating more tasks during the middle of a sprint? Some team will say, no, you should not. Some team will say, yes, of course, you should, because what if you find a defect? You know, you developer, you are an agile team member you're working on, you find a defect, and then you submit a defect. Therefore, there are more tasks added into the sprint, so of course, time remaining will go up. In general, you don't want to practice that commitment is not a commitment, meaning tasks should not be easily created, and tasks should be all created estimate on day 0. Normally, for a 2-week sprint of team member size 9, 7, you might need to spend half day to estimate all the time estimate needed to populate the entire workload on day 0. Such effort spent will prove that it will help you better create a self-driving team. So burn down chart using time remaining, how does it work? Well, basically, for each story, you're going to have tasks. On the day 0, all the tasks should be estimated with time remaining. Then, hopefully, you're working on the day task 1, spend 1 day, 3 days become 2 days. Or for some reason, you don't work on them, or for some reason, the time remaining just do not go down for 2 days, and then it becomes 1 day, becomes 0 days, and other tasks similarly start going down. like this. Obviously, the task owner could be different team members. Therefore, some of the tasks are going down in parallel. And if for one owner, often the task is supposed to be task 1 going down a few days, task 2 going down, task 3 going down, and one by one, you finish all the tasks. So as you finish all the tasks, the story gets finished, become the working software. So question is, we often say assign points to, we even call story points, but really the points representing the size of an effort should be assigned to development task, not really a story. Similarly, a story 1 that requires 3 tasks to implement, the time remaining on day 0 for story 1 really should be the sum value of all the tasks needed to finish a story. So I want to take a question poll. Do you like the time remaining based burndown report because it is easier to practice, especially when the team is starting practicing Agile? Or it can be used to predict the remaining effort for a team to finish a sprint, so you have a better view of when all the tasks will be done. It reflects a team member's true ability and capacity. When all the team members start to update time remaining daily, such burndown can better predict when all work will be done. Since it directly represents a team member's estimate of the desired time needed to drive him or herself, it can help to create a self-driving team. So let's take a look.
Okay, we'll close the poll in about 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, closing poll.
Yeah. So these questions really you can answer multiple times because many of the choices are all correct. So first of all, I want you guys to know the market is like some initially when Agile is introduced, it's all about time remaining. Meaning each of the tasks you should estimate a time remaining, and it's assigned to the programmer or the user interface designer, and the initial time remaining represent that person's estimate. Because I am very new to this project. I don't know too much of the programming logic behind the code. I'm studying the software, the source code. I cannot be too predictive. Nevertheless, it's going to take me 5 days to finish this task. Other programmer might take 1 day, but that's me. I'm just estimating 5 days. Is this good? Yes, it is, because it represents what you can do. If I force you to estimate 1 day because you should only spend 1 day, this task is so easy, it's going to screw our burndown report. It's not going to show the burndown report actually to representing when each of the tasks will be done. It's become useless unless a burndown report reflects the true driving of what my team can do. Also, the burndown report can only be helping to create a self-driving team if it's estimated by the team member, him or herself, and reflecting what that person is capable and willing to do. So that time remaining burndown report is useful. However, some teams don't like burndown report using time remaining. They want to use points to do burndown report. So here is a burndown report based on the remaining points. So what is points? So this based on the fact that every task is assigned with a point. Every task has a worth of itself. This task was 10 points, that task was 15 points, and that task was 5 points. Normally, a 15-point task is bigger than 10 points, and a 5-point task is represent less value this task brings to the working software. So when you say this points represent a value, it's contribute to the working software, then question becomes, so what is the value? Some team member says the value represents the contribution to the working software in terms of its functional usefulness. And then that value is become very hard to estimate. There's no standard so that such value become useful to become across multiple teams, because each team define the value in a different way. And others represent this value to be the ideal time that requires for an average skilled person spending quality time in terms of number of days this task will finish, or in terms of number of hours. So the average skilled person, meaning I do not care how skillful you are, how new you are. In average, this is the average skilled person. This task will take about 2 days. As long as you're not playing games, you're working full effort, you're not chatting all the time, it's going to take you 16 hours to finish this task. That's the value. So how do you estimate? Well, some team introduced the concept. It's a Fibonacci sequence number. We like math, you know. We want to assign a fancy formula, you know, which is the next value is the sum of the previous 2 values, and it starts with 1 and 2. 3 is 1 plus 2, 5 is 2 plus 3, 8 is 3 plus 5, 13 is 5 plus 8. That's the Fibonacci sequence number. It represents the size of a task. How useful this one is? Well, the fact is, I think it's more important how do you estimate such points. It's less important if you use Fibonacci number sequence or not, I think. So sometimes some teams use the estimated by the Scrum Master, some team by the whole team, and some team use a poker card of the Fibonacci sequence number on it, and pull your card and remove the highest number and the lowest number, whatever the other number, take the average, is the size of the task. So as a result, each task is assigned with a point, which is skill, the owner's skill independent. It represents how much contributions you are going to make to the team. So we start to see task 1 has 3 points, task 2, 2 points, task 4, 2, 3, 3, 4. And by day 4, many tasks get closed. Therefore, we get points finished. These points will be only finished when the task gets closed. Whether the task gets closed or not should be only based on the status of the task. There's no need for you to say, you know what, I finished 1 point, there are 2 points remaining, because that's not time remaining. That's just the points. So another question, do you like this approach? You like the points-based burndown report because it is easier to practice for the entire team members. No daily update is needed because you do not need to update the time remaining. You only need to update the status. You have to change the status at the least, right? When your progress changes to the work done, points get finished. So it is easier. It can predict when all work will be done with really the same effectiveness as a burndown report. It reflects a team's productivity. It can also motivate a self-driving team. So let's see if you like all these points to be good or not.
Okay, we'll close the poll in about 10 more seconds.
Okay, so many of you recognize that it seems to be like it is easier to practice for the entire team. It's less important. Others are more important. So the fact of the matter is, indeed, the burn down report, I think we're going to skip the question number 7. If you were driving, and you know what, let's do this one too. This is easier. So if you are going to practice, are you going to use time remaining, or you're going to use time-based time report based on what I just described, the pro and the cons? Okay. Actually, most of you like to do both. And it happened to be that the market has been. The market has been like just what you guys voted. Agile team normally actually practice both. And I think both are valuable. One is representing the true effort that a team member can drive him or herself, regardless how capable you are. If you are making the contributions, let's honor this kind of contribution. Let's respect whatever the time remaining our team members are estimating, be it. Let us motivate such practice so that they are driving themselves, and we are having a better prediction when the task will be all done. Let's also recognize each team members are making the contribution, especially not necessarily based on burn down report, but based on velocity report, which later on I will describe more. So here's a thought. It's not a question poll. So what is time remaining anyway? Does time remaining represent the entire dynamic workload of a team? Or time remaining should only represent the implementation effort of a team? Now I wish it's a poll question too, because I want to get you guys feedback on that too. First of all, I would say the market, this thing is mispracticed. Often a team tries to represent the entire dynamic workload, including the QA testing task as well as the development task. And I think it will be so much better and so much meaningful and so much more effective to create a self-driving team. Just estimated time remaining based on the implementation effort. Meaning the time remaining should be used estimating the driving power of converting something into the working software, instead of time remaining estimating all the QA testing effort needed to protect the quality. So here is why. If you think of, let's go to the previous slide here. Yeah, if you think of a development sprint contains all the commitment of those tasks that representing feature need to be converted into the working software, that represents some of the defects that need to be fixed into the working software, then naturally you would think a story 1-1 not only should contain the development task, it might need to contain the QA testing task. It's absolutely needed that on the day 1, all the development tasks for a story 1 should be created. Here, it's 1 task, but it could be 2 development tasks. But do you need to create all the QA testing tasks as well and estimate how much time you're going to remain to do the QA testing? The answer actually is no, at least in the SpecDD. For Scrum process, maybe you guys are already practicing, QA testing tasks must be created on day 1. Question is, how can you predict it's going to take 2 or 3 days for me to assure its quality? And does that 3 days even matter for you to say, drive yourself. I need to do myself so that all the QA testing will be done within 3 days as my time remaining target, so that I motivate myself to do testing efficiently, that within 3 days I finish the testing and it will be done, and to make sure the story one is high quality. That's not practical. The reason is QA testing need to be only created based on the fact that your developers are creating the working software. Yes, you know the testing standard, but you don't really can predict how much testing it will require unless you see the working software, unless you start to have the feel of this software behaves like this based on the fact a development task is done, and done with this kind of a capability by the programming skill, or the dedication, as well as the consideration on the testing. So in other words, it's better to create QA testing task as a subtask, or in this case as an event representing it's a smaller task, but belongs to a development task. Meaning we're testing the development task for the quality, but the way we test is to use a test case standard to test it. Not only me as a QA floater is testing, but I am encouraging the programmer, the owner of the task, testing themselves. I am just creating a subtask, reminding the owner of who is the programmer that you need to test. And I'm helping you because I have created test cases. So to summarize, time remaining becomes so much easier to practice. Time remaining can drive a team to create a working software, to motivate the team. This is the time estimate target. You have estimated yourself. You are driving yourself to accomplish the work within the time remaining you estimated. But we need a quality. Without a vehicle, a practice standard that we can not only see our sprint commitment get all done and we have a working software to deliver to the end user, but indeed the working software is usable and can be deployed with a quality. It requires process. It requires quality-specific artifact. So here is the way SpecDD recommends. The SpecDD recommends that we should always have a dynamic testing library, which can include the test procedures as test case. Test case contains the procedure and expected result. A test case defines a quality standard for one aspect of a requirement function, a product feature. The test case can be used to create child tasks. So in this case, there is a parent task 73. We estimate we have spent 5 hours, 3 hours more, the work will be done. However, we want to have a test case 1 and test case 2 happen to be related to this task because this task is an implementation task for a parent requirement, which represented by the requirement spec 1, which happen to contains it's a story committed to the current sprint. As we test this task, we might only test 1 test case. We might test 2 test cases because this is one aspect of a requirement spec for the implementation effort. So obviously, we want the programmer to be verified by the programmer. Such testing, the owner might not be necessarily Terry Johnson, who is the programmer. The owner might be the QA floater, the joint QA member of the Agile team. And Pamela merely makes sure that such test cases as a testing standard exist. And Pamela makes sure such testing subtasks created. And the testing procedure is very handy. So the programmer can see, oh, this is the way they're going to do testing for my task. And I want to test myself. I want to verify. So the programmer verify it, and then the development task, can be better quality assured. When the programmer says time remaining becomes 0, one of the requirements of a development culture could be, well, all the QA testing subtasks must be in a state of programmer verified. Otherwise, you should not claim the time remaining is 0. Further, even you verify all these QA testing, the QA will still do a final check to make sure this task is done and with the attached testing standard performed. So if we go back to this development hybrid object model, I want to emphasize to give a summarized review. So we are saying requirement epic get quantified to create spec. Each of the requirement spec represent a product features or an improvement of a function that is broken down into a smaller amount of effort needed to implement it. So such a spec often is 3 days, 5 days, or less of the effort needed. And such requirement spec often is represented in the viewpoint of the end users. As such spec get assigned to the development space, stories are created. And each of the story normally is small. Then the development tasks represent, sometimes you only need to have one development task to implement a requirement. Sometimes you need a multiple task. And let's also emphasize why sometimes you need a multiple stories. Because for the same requirement, you might need to be implemented to the different operating systems support. You might need to be implemented by the related product modules in order to make this requirement function to be working properly. You need to have related module to be both functioning, so you can create stories. This way, a requirement spec get reusable by creating multiple stories and by creating multiple tasks. Let's discuss with a different kind of viewpoint. What if your team do not practice the requirement to be properly broken down into smaller specs? In an ideal way, a requirement spec represents just about 3 days effort. What if you create a spec that actually could be 10 days or could be even more? Obviously, by creating multiple stories and creating smaller tasks, you still have a chance to save this practice not in a good way by having story to be used to broken a big spec into smaller implementation commitment. Obviously, this is not good, and ideally, you want the requirement spec to be small so that by looking at the requirement, which is not burned, it's retained. Even you have the working software done, the requirement always exists. So you can always view the requirement back to understand the requirement there. The other things I want to emphasize using this picture is to answer one of the previous questions. So now you start to creating development tasks to implement a requirement. However, the requirement itself initially might not necessarily be fully specified. A requirement spec, in-depth spec, represents an abstract of a requirement. It only contains a simple title, normally short description of what this product feature needs to be like. As you create a working software, you start to further create chances of having this requirement spec to have more bodies, meaning user interface design, usability design, functional logic description, detailed document can be added. In-depth spec, it emphasizes this story might be burned, but the story is a pointer pointing to the requirement spec. That requirement spec, as well as its attachments, always exist. At any time, you can review back the requirement spec as well as its detailed requirement document. So as a result, you can see that such detailed requirement document management is important in depth spec. It's used to drive the development task. And vice versa, the development task and the working software created often will be used to refine your requirement, but such requirement should be documented. The improved understanding of what needs to be done should be always exist in the dev spec system. And if you think about the test cases, to some degree, you really can think about such test case is also the attachment to a requirement, a spec, meaning the requirement function spec 1, it does contain QA testing standard, and such testing standard, while exists as the QA-related artifact objects, they really enrich you to better understand the requirement from the viewpoint of its quality.